Hey everyone, I'm Gloria S, Crump, the Queen of Real Estate with the Coastal Leaders Realty Group. Thank you for joining this week's Tea and Crumpets. And today I have Mike Conroy, our special guest. He is with Mike Conroy Consulting Associates and Expert Dry. And so thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yes, so we are talking about a few things that involve molds.
Right.
And so how long have you been in this field?
Well, I got in the mold industry through the water damage mitigation business. And I've been in water damage mitigation for about 25 years.
Oh wow, right before Ivan.
Right before Ivan. Yes.
And so what areas do you serve?
Predominantly Northwest Florida, South Alabama, but I go as a consultant. I end up I've been as far away as Key West. I get hired by other companies to go and do mold inspections and water damage assessments in hospitals, schools, healthcare facilities, a lot of hotels.
Oh wow, so you don't do just residential
No.
condos, you do also hospitals, major commercial buildings
Right.
and things. Well, that's really neat. So, and plus down here, we're obviously on the Gulf.
Right.
And there's a lot of moisture in the air. So
Correct.
You're very busy, I'm sure. So how did you get into the air quality field?
Well, in the water damage mitigation business has been around a long time.
Yes.
But I can't remember the exact year. It had to have been in the early 2000s. There was a legal case in Texas. A woman named Melinda Ballard and her husband sued Farmers Insurance Company for a claim that was a bad faith claim, where they said that the house had mold. Farmers didn't react as they had hoped. Anyway, it was a huge judgment.
Yep.
And that caused the entire mold industry to begin.
Oh wow. So you would thought, I would think that it would have been a lot sooner than that. Not sooner, but a lot longer than just early 2000s.
Well, and obviously people weren't aware of the need to remediate or correct mold.
It just kind of opened up another field, like career field, for people to say, okay, this is actually a big deal.
This is a big deal.
And these people made it a big deal, so it just opened up, kind of like a can of worms.
Well, in Texas, there was contractors back then said mold is gold.
Oh.
And that's when the insurance companies decided we've got to pull the reins in on this.
People are hoping they're gonna be like leaving faucets on purpose,
well,
poking holes in pipes.
And regret. I think there was an awful lot of bad actions at that time.
That's sad.
Oh yeah.
I mean, people do health-wise, it can affect them tremendously.
Sure, and that's true.
Yeah. So mold needs 3 conditions.
Right, we spoke about 3 conditions.
So there's 3 conditions mold needs to develop and multiply. So what are those conditions?
Proper temperature, but mold will grow much colder than we're comfortable and much warmer than we're comfortable.
Yes.
So you can't use that very well to control it.
Okay.
It needs an organic food source, but we build our buildings with organic food sources, with drywall that's paper and wood studs, and then we fill our houses with natural fibers, sisal rugs,
which is huge down here.
We wear leather shoes.
I was just gonna say our clothes, cotton.
So mold has plenty of food.
Yes.
We ourselves give off mold food as we live. So the last thing is moisture. We have to control moisture. In fact, the EPA says the key to mold control is moisture control. Our challenge is in this climate, we've got moisture all the time.
Oh my gosh, the humidity level, especially in the summertime. I mean, we're sometimes in upper 90s. It feels like 100.
Right.
So yes.
And even when the air conditioner's on, the humidity can be in the 70s indoors.
It can, for sure. And especially if people have, crawl spaces or basements. I mean, it's harder to regulate it. It can be even in the upper 80s because I have a crawl space and I'll check it every now and then. So Now, can people just call a mold remediation contract perform inspection or assessment, or do you suggest people calling like somebody like yourself that's a consultant, so that way it's almost like you call somebody, they're always going to find that issue?
I think there's some benefit to that, because I don't have an I'm not going to gain anything by telling you you have or don't have a problem.
Yes. So people can trust you.
Well, yes.
Yeah, and that's where, because we call a lot of times people, when we do get inspections back, and we'll call somebody and we're always thinking, oh gosh, they're just going to stick it to us because they feel like it has to be done. So that's why we get multiple people to try to weed out maybe who is not being honest, so to speak. So, and let's see. So after someone does call, or just figured out that they do have a potential issue, should they have a home inspection be done before or after the mold?
I think on a real estate transaction,
we
I
usually
know
do
that,
the home inspection.
that you do the home inspection first. 2 reasons. One, the home inspector is another set of eyes.
Correct.
And a home inspector will,
they're definitely like a neutral party.
and if they're going to make a note sometimes that said, suggest you contact a mold professional to look at this. And a lot of people don't know who to call. Well, that's me. I'm that mold professional. Well, I've had people call me over the years and said, I never even knew anybody did this.
Yeah.
The other reason for the home inspector first, frankly, is if there's something else wrong with the house that you're not going to buy it anyway.
Yeah.
You don't care if it's got mold or not, do you?
Yeah. That's
and
very
I don't
true.
mean that. I don't mean.
No, that's very true. Yeah, if there's something else that cannot be readily resolved, and it's a much big ticket item that they were expecting, then they can save the money and not worry about the mold inspection.
That's right. So that's my feeling.
Yeah.
But that being said, there is a time frame, so don't wait until the day before closing to decide to get that done.
Be within the time. Yes, for sure. So who often calls you? Do you hear mostly for like the actual realtors, or I guess it just depends?
I do get calls from realtors because they, and they're often the people that say I didn't know who to call.
Oh wow, yeah.
And my hope is that more of them will know who to call. But I hear from homeowners, I hear from buyers, I hear from sellers, I hear from contractors, a variety of people.
Well, what all is involved when for a mold inspection and assessment?
Well, a lot of it has to do with a visual inspection. I'm going to ask questions. If someone calls and says, I think I've got, let's say someone calls and they think, an example, I'm going to go do one tomorrow. A gentleman called and I said, why do you think you have a problem? And he said, well, because my wife and I are coughing and we've got this and this and this. And I said, well, how long has this been going on? And he said, well, now months. Well, my reason for asking that question was, this interview we're doing is in March. It's also pollen season.
Oh, yes.
So if this is something that's happened in the last 30 days, let's look at that before we start looking at mold.
Yes.
But he said, no, months. All right, now we just ask a lot. I ask a lot of questions when I end up going, because I really don't want to come and charge you if you can find the problem yourself.
Yeah, for sure.
And I can give directions on, this is what I want you to do.
Yes. So what are some examples? I mean, we talked briefly before the video that there were a couple of little examples that, you brought to light some certain smells that I didn't know meant something. And so that's why you ask a lot of questions. But what are a couple of examples you can tell us about?
Well, very recently I had a project in Northwest Florida where I went to a home and the homeowner, the people lived in Atlanta. They only came to the home about every 6 weeks. And they originally wanted a mold test done because of the gentleman's daughters said when they left the house and they go home, they get their clothes out of the closet and the clothes smelled like pickles.
Like pickles.
And I'm thinking, well, that doesn't remind me of mold. but it is common for formaldehyde to smell like like pickles.
Pickles. Oh gosh.
And if you remember, after Hurricane Katrina, the FEMA trailers and the formaldehyde that the government was being sued about because they were producing these trailers rapidly, and the building materials that were used in those FEMA trailers, the cabinets and interior finish, were off-gassing formaldehyde.
Oh,
and because they were so brand new, they didn't have enough time to off-gas. Off-gassing is increased sometimes with heat and time.
Yeah.
So they were manufacturing these things as quickly as possible and putting people in them without the time and the smell. People, yeah.
Yeah.
Another one recently was another Northwest Florida home with.
Hope I don't smell like pickles.
with a natural fiber rugs, and I determined in that one the person that called me said, I went to the home, and the person asked, "Do you smell that?" Well, I've never been there, so what am I supposed to be smelling?
What's abnormal? Yeah.
Right. She was under the impression that it was some other thing. I narrowed it down to what I believed, and I believe still, I think we proved it, the natural fiber rugs in the home, beautiful rugs, but the backing was decaying, and it was causing an odor that was causing her to have some symptoms that made her ill.
Oh.
So once
Who
those...
would have ever thought?
Well,
that's why they got to call you so they can figure out the consulting part.
That's it.
Gosh, because I'm not going to say a company that's the mold remediation contractor, they would have ripped every sheetrock out.
I hope they wouldn't, but
I'm not going to say who, but they're notorious.
Okay. I don't know. I just try to solve it. Let's see if we can figure out what we're going to do. And I use this all the time.
Well, it saves the homeowner in just money in the long run.
The gentleman in one of the gentleman whose daughters had the smell of formaldehyde. I think he was hoping or was thinking, well, what do I need to do to solve it?
Yeah.
And he's prepared to write a check to fix it. And I said, what you need to do is open up the house and let it air out.
Yeah.
And that's free.
And that's free. I bet he loved the sound of that.
I guess he, it seems to be solved because we haven't been back.
Yeah, well, one thing that we were talking about earlier before we did the video, you were saying how mold can be different colors depending on what it feeds on.
Right.
And I thought that was really interesting. So obviously mold is going to be different on wood versus sheetrock versus even clothes, but we've always heard, or at least I have, black mold. Everybody's like, oh, that's the bad stuff. But really, there's not any, it's just the color, but that's not
there is no species of mold called black.
Yeah.
And the media created the term black mold. And that mold is normally a mold called Stachybotrys. But Stachybotrys, it prefers mold like people.
Yeah.
Some people like hot weather and some people like cold weather. Mold sometimes likes drier things to eat. Yeah. And some mold likes wetter things to eat.
And the
Stacky likes chronically wet drywall. Predominantly likes that a lot.
Like a plumbing leak.
Plumbing leak.
Constant.
Right.
Okay.
And that your chances for stacky are better there. A real common mold is Aspergillus and Penicillium, and there's actually two kinds of mold, but they'll grow in 48 hours.
Now, is that same spelling as penicillin?
Yeah, it is penicillin. Penicillium, there's a number
of... variation? Is the penicillin a variation?
Well, Aspergillus and Penicillium are two totally different molds. Okay. But when the lab looks at them under a microscope, the spore that they're looking at, they look identical.
Oh, wow.
The only way you can tell them apart is if you culture them. Gotcha. And then they have to grow. Okay. You don't want either of them.
No.
So they just bundle them together
Yeah.
and call it, Penicillium aspergillus.
Yeah.
And they're very common.
Yeah, so, and one thing that we were talking about too is that mildew versus mold. Mildew is obviously mold.
Mildew is mold.
It's just, it seems not as scary.
I think that's the reason people use the term mildew, so they don't say the word mold.
Because, we would see, my grandparents had a pool, so, vinyl, pool liner, and it would have like the green mildew, you just wiped it off,
right,
kind of thing, but it is a mold.
Well, there is mildew that technically mildew is a mold that grows on plants.
I gotcha. Okay, so, and that's a live source. That's its food.
It is.
So, okay, I'm learning a lot.
Mold is doing the job it was designed for, which is
Yes.
breaking down organic material. But it can't tell the difference between a pile of pine straw or the canvas on the back of the Mona Lisa.
Oh, yeah.
So it's just clueless as to what to eat. It just, when the conditions are right, it goes to work.
It's just hungry.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you brought some books today.
I brought a couple of books. I think this is a fun one. This is called by a doctor, Dr. Jeffrey May. This book was written in 2001 when people said, well, I've got a mold problem. This book is called My House is Killing Me.
My House is Killing Me. Oh.
And the number of different things in addition to mold that could be part of your problem.
Yeah.
Or, people also will say, well, mold's not a big deal to most people. It just, you might just get runny nose or itchy eyes. Imagine if that's your house though, and you're that way all the time in the house.
Yeah, yes.
This one, worldwide exposure standards for mold and bacteria.
Oh, goodness.
It's amazing how other countries around the world have standards for mold. The United States does not.
I'm not surprised one bit, because our country.
Well, it's.
But that is interesting that other countries do have standards.
Well, the writer of this book gives I think Congress had an opportunity in the 80s to pass a standard for mold under OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health. They chose not to do it.
It'd be too hard to regulate.
I think part of it would just change dramatically so many different industries.
Oh, yeah.
And so rather than risk that, they did nothing.
Yeah.
Additionally, we were talking earlier about some of these countries that have standards also have socialized medicine. So if a person has a mold promoted or prompted illness, it's the government that's on the hook for their treatment.
Gotcha.
Versus in our country, if you get sick from mold, it's on you to treat it and your money.
Yes.
So that's anyway. I don't want to come.
They want regulations so to keep.
They would prefer not to deal with it.
It's not as costly to them in the long run if they have standards that other people have to live up to because it's out of their pocket to fix to get to the standards. So
I know I'm sounding political, but
it makes perfectly good sense in that because that makes sense because they're sitting here like, no, you have standards, but everybody else has to work out of their pocket to make sure the environment, their living environment, their home, whatever it may be, working is to those standards.
Right.
Because it prevents people having to go get medication and be sick. So, yeah. Well, neat. Well, I am curious about that book.
You need to order it.
I probably will, especially if people have allergies and asthma.
And I would agree with that.
Yeah.
And I would suggest anybody if they, and it's a very good book.
Yeah, especially with older homes. Well, even newer homes, especially coming through, storms and stuff. So.
Right.
Well, good deal. Well, I appreciate all your time.
Well, thank you.
And thank you for teaching us. And we'll have his contact information at the end of the video. And hope you learned something. And now if you sell pickles in your house, call him. And it could be from over high.
Check the refrigerator first.
Check your refrigerator first. So
make sure that children didn't leave the lid on.
Exactly. No pickle juice is spilled.
That's it.
So good deal. Well, thank you again. We appreciate you watching.